The desert doesn't care about you. That's the first thing you learn. Not in any briefing, not in any training manual. You learn it in your body, in the way the heat presses down like a hand on your skull, in the way the sand gets into everything. Your boots. Your teeth. The corners of your eyes while you sleep. I learned it the night Petty Officer Second Class Reyes saved my life. And I wasn't even the one they were trying to kill. We'd been in country for 11 days when the mission came down. Forward operating base Kestrel, about 40 clicks east of Mosul, a place so unremarkable it didn't even have a name on the civilian maps. Just a grid reference. A smudge of sand that somebody in a Washington office had decided was important enough to die for. Our unit was attached to a Naval Special Warfare Team for the Op Joint Task Force stuff. I was Army, 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion, and most of us had learned early not to say anything stupid around the SEAL teams. They had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you'd shown up to a knife fight with a crayon. But Reyes was different, and not in any way I was expecting. She was maybe 5'4" in her boots. Maybe. Dark hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She had this habit of clicking her teeth together when she was thinking. Not loud, just this small percussion that you'd start listening for once you noticed it. She spoke Spanish to herself under her breath when she was reading maps. Not prayers. Not curses. Just narrating, it seemed like. Working through the geography out loud in the language that came first. I noticed her on day 3 because she was the only person on the FOB who seemed genuinely unimpressed by the heat. Everyone else, me, Specialist Dominguez, even the older guys like Staff Sergeant Yates who'd done 3 tours before this one, we all had this defeated hunch to us by mid-afternoon. The kind of posture that says I will survive this but I won't enjoy it. Reyes sat outside the operations tent at 1400 hours and ate an MRE like she was at a dinner table. Upright. Methodical. Utterly unbothered by the 108-degree air pressing down on all of us. I asked Dominguez about her. He shrugged the way he shrugged at most things. She's been to worse places, he said. That's what Lieutenant Gaines said. I didn't ask what places. You learn that too. You don't ask what places. The mission briefing came on day 11 at 0200, which meant nobody slept. Lieutenant Commander Hargrove ran it. Navy, wireframe glasses, the kind of jaw that looks carved rather than grown. He had a voice that never went up or down in pitch regardless of what he was saying, which was either the most calming thing in the world or the most unsettling, depending on the day. Objective is a compound approximately 6 kilometers north-northeast, he said, tapping the satellite image on the screen. Intel has confirmed the presence of a high-value target, Ibrahim al-Masri. He's been coordinating IED supply routes through this corridor for 8 months. We take him off the board, the network in this sector degrades significantly. The compound looked like every other compound. Mud brick walls. Flat roof. A courtyard that would be a kill box if the angles went wrong. Current headcount inside is estimated at 12 to 14 armed personnel, Hargrove continued. There are also 3 civilian women confirmed on premises. Possibly more. This complicates extraction. He said it the way you say it might rain, noting the complication without performing distress about it. That's the training. The distress is something you carry separately, folded up somewhere private, and you take it out later when there's time. Reyes was in the front row. She wasn't taking notes. She didn't need to. I watched her study the satellite image with the kind of focus that's almost physiological. You could see her building it in her head, rotating it, populating it with bodies and angles and contingencies. She clicked her teeth once. Twice. Then, she asked the one question nobody else had thought to ask. The civilian women. Where are they quartered? Which building? Hargrove pointed to the northeast corner of the compound. Small structure, separate from the main building. Reyes looked at it for a long moment. That's where I need to be, she said. There was a pause in the room. Not pushback, just the collective processing of implications. Hargrove nodded once. Agreed. We rolled out at 0345. There's a sound a convoy makes in the dark that I've never been able to describe to anyone who hasn't been in one. It's not loud. It's this dense, purposeful rumble, a sound with intent in it. Boots shifting on metal floors. Gear checked and rechecked by hands that don't need eyes to do it anymore. The radio feeding static and murmured coordinates into the dark. I sat across from Reyes in the back of the second vehicle. She had her eyes closed. I thought she was sleeping, which seemed insane to me, but then I noticed her lips moving, that quiet Spanish narration again, running the compound layout through her head. Rehearsing. Dominguez was beside me. He nudged my arm and tilted his head at her. "I shook mina." Leave her alone. He shrugged. He shrugged a lot, Dominguez. It was his primary language. The desert outside was a different kind of dark than most places. No ambient light. No gradient. Just absolute black with stars so dense overhead they almost looked like a mistake, like somebody had knocked over a jar of them and hadn't cleaned up. Under any other circumstances it would have been beautiful. I know guys who say they loved it. The desert at night. The stars. I understand that. I also understand that you can love the look of a thing and still have it inside your nightmares. We hit the breach point at 0511. I'm not going to walk through the tactical sequence in detail. That's not what this is. But I'll tell you what it felt like, which is the only true accounting I know how to give. It felt like jumping off a high board into water you haven't checked the depth of. That second in the air. The commitment of it. You've left the platform and there's nothing between you and whatever's below except the air and the choice you already made. We were through the outer wall in under 40 seconds. That's when it went sideways. The intel had said 12 to 14 armed. The compound held 18. Someone had been sloppy, or someone had lied, or the situation had simply shifted the way situations do, with total indifference to your planning. The courtyard erupted. I remember the sounds and layers. AK fire, that specific crack, different from American weapons, a sound that embeds in your nervous system after the first time you hear it and never fully leaves. Radio chatter in my earpiece. Yates shouting something I couldn't parse. The grunt of someone taking a hit, not a scream, just a grunt, because the training changes how your body responds to pain before you even know you've been hit. I pressed along the east wall. Dominguez was on my left. We were pushing toward the secondary building, Reyes's objective, when I lost visual on her. 1 second she was ahead of us, moving with that specific quality of movement that separates trained operators from everyone else. Not speed. Not aggression. Economy. Every step placed deliberately. Every motion spending only exactly what it needed to spend. Then, she wasn't there. "Reyes," I said into the radio. "Reyes, what's your position?" Static. Then, her voice, very level, very controlled. Secondary structure. "I have a situation. Continue your mission." Continue your mission. I knew what that meant. It meant don't come. It meant I've got it. It meant trust me. It also meant she was alone in that building with whatever the situation was. I looked at Dominguez. He looked at me. He shrugged. Which, in the language of Dominguez, meant, we both know what we're about to do. We peeled off from the main push. Yates would curse us for it later, and did, at considerable length and volume, using anatomical references I'd never encountered arranged in that particular order. But Yates was also the one who recommended us both for commendations afterward, so I think we understood each other. The secondary structure had 1 door and 2 window openings. No glass. Just rough square holes in the mud brick. What I heard coming from inside stopped me outside the door for exactly 1 second. A man's voice. Raised. The tone of someone who'd grabbed authority they hadn't earned and was using volume to hold it in place. And, underneath it, not screaming, not crying, but something worse. The silence of people waiting to find out what kind of fear they were going to have to survive. Then, a sound that bypassed my brain entirely and hit something older. The sound of a hand on a throat. I went through the door. Later, in the after-action, I would be asked to describe what I saw in precise sequential terms, for the report, for the record, for the purposes of people sitting in clean rooms who need events organized into something manageable. I'll tell you what I actually saw. The room was maybe 12 feet by 15. Low ceiling. A single kerosene lamp on a wooden crate throwing orange light that moved because there was a gap somewhere in the wall where the desert got in. 3 civilian women huddled against the far wall. 2 older, 1 young, maybe 17. They were pressed together in the specific way of people who have decided that being smaller might help. 1 armed man near the door, not the one Dominguez dropped before I'd finished registering the layout. The second one I didn't clock until he was already a problem because I was looking at the thing in the center of the room. A man, heavyset, beard to his collarbone, body language that said he'd never needed to question whether he was the most dangerous thing in a room, had Reyes by the throat. One hand lifted her off the floor. She was in the air. And she was not panicking. That's the thing I keep coming back to when I run it. Because the first thought I had, the animal, unfiltered thought before training kicked in, was, oh God, she's going to die. The size of him. The mechanical certainty of it. The way her boots weren't touching anything. But her hands weren't clawing at his wrist the way a person does when they're scared and scrambling. They were going somewhere. I need to back up 8 seconds, because the sequence matters. She told me later, debriefing, both of us on cots in the medical tent, her voice still slightly roughened at the edges, that she'd entered the secondary structure ahead of us and found the women already contained. 2 armed guards she'd expected. 1 she hadn't. A courier, she thought, or a facilitator of some kind. Not a fighter by training, but more dangerous for it, because fighters have rules they operate by and facilitators have only results. He'd grabbed her before she cleared the threshold. Got a hand on her weapon to prevent her drawing it. She'd had exactly the amount of time it took him to get his feet set and his grip around her throat to decide what to do with that time. She didn't use it to panic. She used it to think. There's a window, she told me. Always a window. A thing they're not protecting because they don't know it's there. I looked for it. The window she found was mechanical. He'd grabbed her dominant arm with his offhand, his left, which meant his right side was open, which meant he had weight forward, which meant if she could generate enough lateral force, she reached for his ear. Not dramatically. Not with the big swinging motion of someone trying to be violent. She reached for it the way you reach for a tool on a shelf. Purposefully. Economically. She compressed the cartilage. What the human ear does under that kind of specific pressure is not something that gets mentioned in polite company. But the result is immediate and total. His brain sent emergency signals to every part of him simultaneously. And, in that fraction second of systemic disruption, his grip changed. Not released. Changed. Which was all she needed. She torqued her body weight in the direction of his compromised grip, dropped her shoulder, drove her feet off the wall she'd managed to get them against, and used the angular momentum to break the line of force at his wrist. She came down to the floor. He came forward into the space she'd vacated. She was already moving in a different direction. That's when Dominguez and I came through the door. What I saw was a man stumbling forward, hand going to his ear, a specific kind of disoriented rage on his face, the rage of someone who'd had a certainty removed from them, and, raised 3 feet away from him, on her feet, weapon drawn, making the kind of sound that doesn't need translation in any language on earth. He stopped. People do, when the variables change that completely and that fast. The man near the door, the second guard I hadn't clocked, I became aware of because Dominguez became aware of him first, and Dominguez's awareness was expressed in a way that ended that particular problem. The room went from chaos to a specific kind of silence. The women against the far wall were still pressed together. Still waiting. The young one, 17, maybe, had her eyes open very wide, and she was watching Reyes with an expression I didn't have a word for then, and still don't now, exactly. Not gratitude. Not relief. Something more complicated than either. Recognition, maybe. Some private arithmetic she was running. Reyes zip-tied her man without taking her eyes off him. She worked fast and, completely, the efficiency of someone who's done this enough times that her hands don't need instruction. Then, she went to the wall where the women were. She crouched down, put herself below their eye level deliberately, dropped below the threat silhouette her tactical gear created, and she spoke. Not English. She spoke in Arabic, which I didn't know she had, fluid, unhurried, nothing like the halting phrasebook stuff I'd picked up. The kind of Arabic that sounds like it was learned from people rather than from recordings. I watched the older women's faces change. Not dramatically, but change. Shoulders. The tension in shoulders is a thing I've learned to read, because it's where the body stores what the face is trying to hide. And I watched the shoulders of those 2 older women drop, fractionally, from somewhere up around their ears towards something more like a normal human position. The young one, she didn't look at Reyes during the Arabic. She looked at me. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't know what I did with it. I held her gaze the way you hold something fragile, without pressure, just acknowledging its weight. She looked away first. Stared at the ground. Some private calculation finished. The radio crackled. Primary objective secured. Say status on secondary. Reyes stood. She touched the side of her neck once, the kind of automatic damage check that's really just your hands confirming what your brain doesn't want to make a big deal of. Secondary secure, she said. 3 civilians. 1 detainee. Coming out. Copy. She looked at me. Looked at Dominguez. I told you to continue your mission, she said. We did, Dominguez said. This is the mission. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile. More like the almost smile, the compressed version, the one that means I'm not going to argue with that because I'm tired and, you might be right. She turned back to the women and spoke again. Brief. Gestured toward the door. The older women rose. Moved. The young one last. She passed Reyes on the way out. She stopped. Said one word. Reyes was quiet for a second. Then, she nodded once, just once, and the girl went through the door into the pre-dawn dark. I asked Reyes later what the girl had said. Reyes was quiet for longer than the question required. She was looking at the ceiling of the medical tent. The kerosene lamp from the compound was nothing. We were in fluorescent light, the sterile logic of triage facilities, but she was looking at the ceiling like it was still dark and orange and moving. She said, I knew you were coming, Reyes told me. She didn't explain it. I didn't ask her to. That dropped, and we moved on. Getting out was its own chapter of the night. The main assault had taken Al-Masri without casualties on our side. Corporal Reinhold had taken a round through his left forearm, which he complained about with a theatrical bitterness that let everyone know he was going to be fine. The compound was cleared. The secondary structure was cleared. The extraction vehicles were where they were supposed to be, which is not always guaranteed and always a relief when it is. We pushed through the outer wall in the reverse order we'd entered. The desert was moving toward dawn in its slow, reluctant way, the sky doing the grey-blue thing at the edges, the stars becoming less obvious, the air cooling to the degree that you noticed cold on your exposed skin before you noticed anything else. My hands were shaking. Not during. After. That's always when they shake. The during is too focused for anything so trivial as adrenaline tremors. But, in the vehicles, moving away from the compound, my hands sitting on my rifle in my lap were vibrating slightly, like a tuning fork that's been struck and can't find a surface to rest against. Dominguez noticed. He said nothing. He reached into his kit and produced 2 squares of a crushed Snickers bar wrapped in a paper towel. God knows when he'd put that there, and put them on my knee without looking at me. I ate them. They tasted like dust and sugar and, I don't know, something ordinary. Something from a world where nobody was grabbing anybody by the throat. Reyes sat across from me again. Eyes open this time. She wasn't narrating. She was doing the damage report thing people do after something is over, the internal inventory, checking each room of yourself to see what the night had rearranged. The bruising on her throat was visible even in the bad light of the vehicle interior. Not massive, but visible. A geography of pressure, recorded in color. She noticed me looking. You've seen worse, she said. On other people, I said. She looked at me. Looked out the back of the vehicle at the desert getting lighter. I'm fine, she said. In the context of the morning we'd had, fine was its own kind of bravery. The particular courage of the understatement. The refusal to be made into a wound. I believed her. I also knew the belief and the truth were 2 different things she'd work out in her own time, in her own private space, in whatever language came first. I've been home for almost 2 years now. I live in a 2nd-floor apartment in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is the kind of detail that matters because Fayetteville is a military town and living there after service is something people either understand immediately or don't understand at all. It's proximity to a world you've half left. A hand still resting on the door. My neighbor has a dog that barks at 0600 every morning, and, the first month back, every time it barked I was out of bed with my heart doing something I don't have a clinical name for. 2 years later I wake up, register the dog, close my eyes, and usually get another hour. Progress, I guess. Progress is just the distance between where you started and where the alarm still gets you. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that the story I'm going to finish now, the part that happened after the desert, after Reyes, after the bruises on her throat and the girl who said she knew someone was coming, that part isn't separate from this apartment and this dog and the morning light through windows in North Carolina. It's the same story. They're all the same story. The debrief took 4 hours, which is average for an op of that complexity. Lieutenant Commander Hargrove presided. There were people on a video link who sat at a conference table that had a coffee service on it. I remember staring at the coffee service with a specific, disproportionate attention that I recognized even at the time as significant. The cream. The individual little packets of sugar. The institutional white of the cups. My pens. My glorious pens. You focus on what your brain can hold. The outcome was classified as a success. Al-Masri was in custody. The IED supply route in that corridor was projected to degrade by 40 to 60% over the following 90 days. 3 civilian women recovered safely. 0 casualties on our side. 1 injured, Reinholdt's forearm, which required surgery and landed him at Landstuhl for 6 weeks, after which he returned to his unit and resumed complaining about things with theatrical bitterness, which is how I know because Dominguez kept me updated. Reyes's actions in the secondary structure were listed in the report in 3 sentences that contain the facts of what she'd done without containing anything true about it. That's what reports do. That's what they're for. They're the container, not the water. I talked to her one more time before she rotated out. 3 days after the op. She was prepping gear in the equipment bay, moving with that same economy she always had, and I came in to return some comms equipment and saw her and almost left, because there's a timing to these things, a when that you feel before you reason it, but she looked up before I could. Hendricks, she said. Reyes. I set down the comms equipment. Stood there with the specific discomfort of someone who has rehearsed a thing and forgotten it at the moment of use. How's the throat? Fine. She went back to her gear. I stood there. You didn't have to come in after me, she said. Not an accusation. Just the record being accurate. No, I agreed. But you did. So did Dominguez. Dominguez, she said, and there it was, the almost smile, the compressed version. I'd have expected it from him. He has the instincts of a golden retriever. Is that a compliment? Golden retrievers are exceptional animals. She looked up again. I'm saying thank you. You didn't need us. She considered this. Went back to her kit. No. But there's a difference between not needing something and not being glad it's there. I thought about that for a while. I still think about it. She pulled a strap through a buckle. Checked the tension. Released it and checked again. Not because it was wrong, I realized, just because the checking itself was the thing. The physical practice of making sure. That girl, I said. The young one. Reyes didn't look up. What she said. I knew you were coming. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. What do you think she meant? Reyes was quiet for long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. She often didn't answer questions she found insufficient. Not rudely, just a quality of silence that said the question doesn't quite fit the thing you're trying to ask. I think, she said, she meant that she knew someone like me existed. That it was possible. And that she'd been holding that belief long enough that it felt like certainty. She pulled the strap again. Kids do that, she said. When they're surviving something. They build a belief and they live inside it. That someone's coming. That it ends. That there's an after. She paused. Usually it's just survival mechanism. A story they tell themselves. But this time, I said. But this time, she said. She didn't finish it either. We had a ceremony of sorts, not official, just the spontaneous kind that happens when a unit has been through something and somebody has beer and the desert night is clear enough to sit outside without tactical purpose. Staff Sergeant Yates gave a speech that was mostly curses deployed with the precision of punctuation. Dominguez ate a second dinner he'd somehow acquired from the FOB kitchen through methods he declined to specify. Reinholdt joined via spotty video call from Landstuhl and spent most of it telling us the hospital food was actively trying to finish what the bullet had started. Reyes sat on the edge of it, not apart, but not in the center. She had a water bottle. She listened more than she talked. At some point Yates said, with the particular sincerity of a man who hides his sincerity under volume, to the people who did the work tonight. All of them. We drank to that. Even Reyes raised her water. Dominguez said, Reyes, next time you get grabbed by a guy that big, maybe wait for backup. She looked at him. I had it handled, she said. I know, he said. That's what I'm saying. Wait for us so we have something to do. She stared at him for another second. Then, she actually laughed, not the almost smile, not the compressed version, but a real one, brief and entirely unguarded. The kind that escapes before a person decides whether to let it out. It was the only time I heard it. She was gone 4 days later. Rotated back. Somewhere else needed her, which was the permanent condition of the people in those units. Always somewhere else, always the next thing, the world continuously generating problems that needed their specific skill set and their specific silence. I didn't have contact information. You often don't. That's also one of the things you learn. How to hold the weight of people you'll likely never see again without it unbalancing you. The communities of the temporary. The brothers and the almost sisters of the operational window. You carry them differently than you carry the permanent people in your life. Not lesser. Just differently. I've thought about that compound 1,000 times. Not obsessively, not in the way that becomes a clinical problem, just the way you return to any scene that rearranged something inside you. The kerosene lamp. The orange light that moved. The women pressed against the wall. The man with his hand on Reyes's throat, and Reyes, in the air, suspended, boots off the ground, his full grip around her neck, going somewhere. Not clawing. Not desperate. Going somewhere. Reaching for the window she'd found in the half-second of inventory she'd taken of her situation. I've had arguments about what that is. Friends from civilian life, mostly, people who want to frame it as training, as muscle memory, as the mechanical output of conditioning. Which it is. Partly. The training is real and the training is what makes the hand move correctly and the body talk at the right angle. But there's something before the training. There's the choice to look for the window instead of looking at the hands around your throat. That's not trained in. That's brought in. That's something a person has in them before any program gets hold of it. A fundamental orientation toward what's the next thing instead of this is the last thing. Reyes had it so deep it wasn't even visible anymore. It had become just the way she moved through the world. The quiet narration in Spanish. The teeth clicking while she thought. The refusal to perform distress. The almost smile that meant I'm not going to fight about this because I'm right and we both know it. I've tried to figure out where it comes from. What in a life builds that particular resource, that unflappable orientation toward the next available action? I've never landed on an answer. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe it's the same as asking where courage comes from, and the answer is just some people have it and the rest of us try to borrow it from them when we are close enough to need it. The girl's face comes back to me sometimes. The young one. 17, maybe. Wide eyes. The look she gave Reyes on the way out. Not gratitude. Not relief. Recognition. That private arithmetic. I knew you were coming. I think about what it costs to hold a belief like that. In the conditions that existed in that compound, under that authority, in that specific darkness, to keep a belief lit inside you like a candle in a sealed room. The breathable air running out. But the belief still there, still burning, small and stubborn and irrational. Someone is coming. Someone like me. It is possible for someone like me to exist with the kind of capability that ends situations like this one. And then, to look up and find it wasn't just a story she'd told herself to survive. I can't imagine what that does to a person. I can't imagine the vertigo of it, the confirmation, the collision of the belief with the real. I hope she's okay. I think about her and I hope she's okay. Here's the thing about war, and I know you've heard versions of this, and I know you're ready for the thing where the soldier says war changes you, which is true but too simple. It doesn't change you all at once. It changes you in layers. The outer layer first, the surface stuff, the startle response and the sleep architecture and the way your eyes move in public spaces, tracking exits and sight lines by reflex. That layer changes fast. The inner layers take longer. The ones about who you trust and why. The ones about what you're willing to walk into when you don't have to. The ones about what you think a person is, fundamentally, what the species is capable of, at both ends of the scale. I came home different at the surface level inside of a week. The inner layers are still changing. I can feel them sometimes, the way you feel something settling in a house, not dramatically, just a small shift, a recalibration, a thing finding its level. What I know is this. I watched a woman hang in the air by her throat and choose not to waste the second she had. I watched 3 women pressed against a wall breathe differently when they heard their language spoken by someone who'd come through the door without asking their captor's permission. I watched a girl who'd survived something I'll never fully understand look at a stranger and say, "I knew you were coming," which is either the most heartbreaking thing or the most hopeful thing, depending on which part of it you focus on, and I've decided it's both. It's always both, that's the rule. I watched Dominguez give me a crushed Snickers bar in the dark and say nothing and mean everything. I watched Yates curse us for 2 minutes straight and then put us in for commendations. I watched Reinhold complain about hospital food from a hospital bed with a surgical dressing on his arm, and I watched his face under the complaints, which was the face of a man who understood completely how close the arithmetic had been and had decided that the arithmetic was beside the point. The arithmetic is always beside the point. Reyes. If you're reading this, which you're not, because you're somewhere out there doing something that doesn't allow for reading things written about you by rangers with shaky hands and crushed Snickers debts they can never repay, you told me there's a difference between not needing something and not being glad it's there. I've been thinking about that for 2 years. I think it might be the most important thing anyone said to me in that country. Maybe anywhere. Thank you for the window. Thank you for always knowing where it was. The dog barked again this morning at 0600. I was already awake. The light was doing the thing it does in North Carolina in late October, coming in low and orange through the blinds, moving slightly, and for 1 second it was the kerosene lamp in the secondary structure, and Reyes was 3 feet away with a weapon drawn and the calmness of a person who has already made all the decisions she needs to make, and the women were rising from the wall, and outside the door the desert was going pale at the edges and the stars were becoming less obvious. Then, it was just the morning. Just October light. Just me, in this apartment, 2 years from the sand. Carrying it.